The postponement of petrol subsidy removal is still raising questions among Nigerians. A day after the federal government of Nigeria announced its plan to delay implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act and retain payment of petrol subsidy for 18 months, the government yesterday approved 3 trillion for the new subsidy regime. The Federal Executive Council, FEC, approved the sum at its weekly meeting in Abuja. The 3 trillion, now budgeted to sustain the payment of subsidy in 2022 alone, amounts to 17.5% of the total of 17.126 trillion makes up the 2022 budget that was signed into law on the last day of 2021. Already, the approved 2022 budget has a deficit of 6.39 trillion, which is 37% of 17.126 trillion. There's a clear indication that the government may borrow more this year than it had earlier projected. Tundu?
May borrow more or will
borrow more.
Most assuredly borrow more. It's unfortunate. We've talked about this, ad nauseum at this point, and that's clearly what's going to happen. I mean, I just wish we had never done this ridiculous dance of subsidy is going to be removed when there was never any kind of sincerity of purpose. So really have spared us all of this discussion. And like I just said yesterday, it does feel like Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, and we watch it roll back down, and we continue to, this exercise is in complete futility. We are going to borrow more. We are going to have a larger deficit, and that's really just the bottom line here. But I know you have other stories, so I'll keep it brief.
Okay. Dr. Bati, you want to sign off on this?
You want to comment on this? Because I don't want you saying you have a lot to say and the producer is saying...
And there are more stories, actually.
Okay, maybe you just go on before I come back.
Let me take the second story. There has been a judicial pronouncement bordering on the practice of federalism following a legal challenge by the Rivers State government. The Federal High Court in Abuja has declared that as unconstitutional the provision of the Police Trust Fund Establishment Act, which empowers the federal government to deduct 0.05% from the federation account to fund the police.
Failing to secure a favorable response from the federal government, the Rivers State government invoked the jurisdiction of the Federal High Court to stop the Apex government from deducting money from the federation account to fund the Police Trust Fund. It hired a seasoned constitutional lawyer and former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Joseph Daudu, senior advocate of Nigeria. The Rivers case, as stated by its counsel, is that by the virtue of the provisions of Section 162 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, all revenues collected by the government of the Federation shall be paid into the Federation account to be shared among the federal, state and local governments. The state further argued that it is unconstitutional for the federal government to deduct money from the Federation account to fund the Police Trust Fund. According to Rivers State, by virtue of Item 45 of the Exclusive Legislative List, second schedule of the Constitution, the police is an agency of the federal government and should be funded solely by the federal government. Rivers State contended that it is unconstitutional for the federal government to take from monies meant to be shared by the 3 tiers of government to fund the police. The trial judge agreed with Rivers. After dismissing a preliminary objection filed by the Attorney General of the Federation, the court ordered the federal government to stop further deduction from the Federation account to fund the police. It also ordered the federal government to refund to Rivers State all monies that would have accrued to the state had monies not been deducted from the Federation account to fund the police. The judge noted that all the states are entitled to the refund, but having not filed any claim against the federal government, other states are not entitled to the refund. Court, the judge held, is not a Father Christmas. The judge also held that it is unconstitutional to deduct 0.5% of net profit of all companies operating in Nigeria for the purpose of funding the Police Trust Fund. Punarman Benjamin, Arise News.
All right. So earlier, there was also mild drama that ensued at the Ekiti State governorship primary of the People's Democratic Party. Some chieftains of the party resorted to fisticuffs in a heated argument over the authentication of certain delegates for some local governments. There were arguments that some names were smuggled to the list. The matter was brought before the Akwa Ibom State Governor Emmanuel Udom, who led the electoral committee from the PDP headquarters in Abuja. Security officers were, however, brought in to restore order. Meanwhile, ahead of the primary election, Senator Biodun Olujimi, one of the aspirants, pulled out alleging disenfranchisement.
I came to drop my letter that I was pulling out of the process. The reason is very simple. I am the only standing elected official of the PDP in this state. And it has pleased our party to say that all the fights of 2 years where we were complaining about the hijacked congresses will favor one person and will go against me completely.
We're just hearing it from people, right? And when the accreditation team came, I mean, when the Congress team came, we're not even aware, we're just being informed, and they have even started accreditation. Normally, the list of delegates ought to have been published and made it public before this accreditation. That was not done, and that is not that means due process is not properly followed.
I think the process is moving through properly, but there are a few skirmishes here and there. Some of them are being rectified and some of them are not. Some people's names are completely absent. I hope that the number of people who should be on the list that are not will not be significant enough. I hope, but there are some little skirmishes.
I'm not in for all those intrigues and so on that people are trying to do here. Everybody must behave well. If you don't behave, you find yourself in real discipline. So we must maintain discipline and everybody must be happy. Have the authentic delegate list here. You can see it's stamped from National Working Committee. Okay? So you can see everything is stamped, acknowledged. This is the list we're going to use. We're not going to use anything outside this.
Right, a lot to chew on this morning. Dr. Bati, we come to you. About 2-3 stories. Good.
Okay, first, let me start with the last story, which is the PDP in Ekiti conducting its primaries, and Kolawole, former commissioner, emerging with 671 votes, and it's from a place called Efon, Ekiti Central. Now, and the allegation is that he's a Fayoshe's man. I think the major problem here is that before now, we had heard of reconciliation between the major gladiators in the People's Democratic Party in Ekiti State. And what has happened yesterday with Senator Biodun Olujime, former deputy governor to former Governor Fayoshe, and a senator in the National Assembly, withdrawing, citing bias, citing disenfranchisement, and also Segun Oni, former governor of the state, also complaining, could be a major setback for the People's Democratic Party in the election, the gubernatorial election scheduled for June 18. So all that expectation that the PDP in Ekiti State had been able to close ranks, that may now not be reality. But I think what is important going forward is for all the major figures to see how they can come together, because out of that, group, if there is this division, then how can the party work together to be able to put up a good showing when the election comes in June? There's still enough time for reconciliation. And all of this points to the point made by Professor Yakub Mahmoud, the head of INEC, after the 2019 general elections. He kept raising the point about the importance of internal democracy within the political parties. And look, the political parties, if they don't observe the principle of internal democracy, either at the local level or at the national level, they are likely to suffer the consequences ultimately. And I hope that that will not be the case in this Ekiti State as the PDP prepares for the next general elections. Now, the second point is the ruling by Justice Muhammad of the Abuja Division of the Federal High Court in the matter of Rivers State versus the AGF and Minister of Justice on the issue of whether the federal government has the right to make unilateral deductions from the the contributive pool, the federation account. And what his lordship has simply stated is a key point of law, that the Constitution is a ground norm. And any other provision, either in a subsidiary legislation or in terms of practice, that is against the provision of that basic law, is to that extent, null and void and of no effect whatsoever. And what Rivers State has done in this case, as it did previously in the case of a value-added tax, is to test the law. And what his lordship, put out there in a declaratory manner is that Section 4 of the Police Trust Fund Act, which allows deductions from the Federation account, runs counter to Section 162 of the 161, 162 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, dealing with the Federation account and how resources are to be distributed. To which every payment should go directly into the Federation account. And there is a formula, there's a subtle reference to the formula for distribution, not allowing any arm of government to unilaterally, alienate part of the funds defined under Section 162 of the Constitution. And of course, his lordship made a point further that, look, refund should be made to the Rivers State government. So, in other words, those deductions are considered an act of injustice and a violation of the law simpliciter. The Attorney General of the Federation had raised an objection, which was summarily dismissed. Well, the option that is available to the Attorney General of the Federation is to go on appeal to a higher court. But the ruling is so direct, the principle is so clear, it's so constitutional that I do not imagine that the federal government of Nigeria will have a different verdict if the matter goes upstairs to higher courts. The third point that has been made is that, yes, whereas the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum, Dr. Kayode Fayemi of Ekiti State, was excited about this ruling and says, well, federal government cannot be making deductions as it so wishes. Since we're running a federal system that is expected to be governed by the law. But it's not enough to just celebrate it, because as the court pointed out in the report by the Arise TV correspondent, the court is not your Father Christmas. If you don't ask for your right, then of course it means you have slept on it, and you may be stopped if you don't act, expeditiously within the framework provided by law. So Rivers State has made this triumph. What I suspect is that most states, on the basis of this ruling, will also go to court to assert their rights. And I imagine that if they do so, since a precedent has been established by this particular court, they may get the same reprieve. The lesson of it all is that, look, you won't know what the law is unless you test it. Finally, as to the issue of the budget, now the federal government says they have approved 3 trillion, right, which will represent about 17.5% of funds already allocated under capital and recurrent in the 2022 budget. Already, that budget has a deficit of 6.9 trillion, which naira, which is over 30% of the entire budget itself. Now, this means additional deficits, and now they are looking for 3 trillion to offset it. What are the steps that they want to take? We're told that the Minister of Finance will meet with NNPC to see how NNPC indebtedness to the federal government can be made available in order to see if the amount can be reduced. The same NNPC that has been talking about under recovery, high cost, and all of that. Well, I don't see much hope in that direction. So whatever meetings they are going to have, I'm sure the NNPC that calculated 3 trillion, they are likely to confront the Minister of Finance to show that, look, we have our own costs. We are not owing the federal government of Nigeria any amount of money. So the assumption that maybe the NNPC is owing money that they will have to return, forget it. All that talk also about the assets of the federal government and all that, providing some kind of buffer, it won't happen. So the only way forward is that the government will borrow more. And it will go to this National Assembly that is, a rubber stamp assembly in many respects with this proposal of 3 trillion. And I have no doubts whatsoever that the Ahmad Lawan National Assembly will just rubber stamp it. And it is you and I, we ordinary Nigerians, we are the ones who are going to bear the brunt. And the future government that will come would be provided, with a major debt profile, an increased debt profile. And yet, in the face of that, we have an administration that keeps telling us that our problem is revenue, our problem is not debt. And now, they are going to deepen the debt profile. And it's not as if this debt that will be incurred will be used for any purpose of efficiency. Kayode Fayemi again, the governor of Ekiti State, has pointed out only 8 states benefit from subsidy, although the details have not been provided yet. So there are many questions that will be raised, and I hope that in the days ahead, the relevant stakeholders will raise the appropriate questions.
I mean, the appropriate questions need to be raised, and I'll really harp on the subsidy issue because we're already at the dire straits. Let's not deceive ourselves. And we ought to have pulled out this subsidy long ago. But the question I'd like to ask is, where's the sincerity? Because at some point last year, this subsidy was said to have been pulled out. Petroleum prices trickled downwards. At some point last year, during the lockdown, I remember vividly. And they said, oh, we have pulled out subsidy. So what happened? And we should also ask, how much liters of fuel are Nigerians consuming on a daily basis? How did all of a sudden, Nigerians with about 11.8 million cars that used to consume about 40 million liters daily, now consume well over 70 million liters daily? What happened? And we should also ask, why is it that during the border closure, the consumption of Nigerians dropped? We also have the consumption dropped during border closure. So it's just obvious that we are subsidizing theft, and some people are going to take our petrol and getting great arbitrage in other parts of West Africa. That's another part to it. N3TRN came out with a report recently that says $46 billion was lost to oil theft in 10 years. $46 billion is like 1 or 2 budget cycles. And that's the problem we're having. We add more debt to it, 3 trillion. Sometimes you wonder, what's the fiscal responsibility? I think there's an act to that effect, that you can't borrow more than a certain threshold, about 40% of your GDP. We're already inching towards that amount and inching over. And that's why
we have already
violated it. And that's why, you see, the next president of Nigeria has better come up with solutions, because not an easy job he's going to be coming into. He's going to be coming into high debt burden, socio-economic circumstances that are very low, a country on its knees. We need to do better.
Well, that's one of those grim certainties, as well as the fact that, taxes, death, Nigeria will borrow.
Yeah.
Those are life certainties,
and you can't raise taxes.
It's so bad.
For a population that is bleeding. See the unemployment numbers. You want to raise taxes? What taxes? Payroll taxes? How many people are working? That's all on News Headline. We take a short break. When we return, we'll have Michael Wilson, Adesu Amora, and Aaron Akeja to give us updates on global business, COVID-19, and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show, and welcome back, Mr. Wilson. I feel like I'm in a seance saying, are you with us? Do go ahead.
There's no seance. I hope I'm with you over here in London. I was just saying that basically the Asia stocks falling, China down as well. Very, very disappointed phone call to investors and financial specialists from Evergrande yesterday. Nobody really much the wiser about what its plans are eventually going to be. We can talk about that. We have been talking about it, seems to me, on most of the broadcasts that we do together. So anyway, a lot of disappointment about that, and nothing really. Maybe they have some restructuring plans in progress within 6 months. That's a long, long way away, as far as I'm concerned. Let's go to China. Staying with China, and Huawei has launched its high-end smartphones today and yesterday, even though its global share goes actually small because of sanctions which have been put on Huawei. Nevertheless, it's been launching these new smartphones, and it hopes to get some kind of business out of that. And it's only got a tiny proportion of the market, but it's hoping it to grow. By complete contrast, the China giant Baidu and automaker Geely have put nearly $400 million into their joint venture into electric vehicles. There's a trend of tech companies into the electrical vehicles, EV space, with the likes of Huawei and Xiaomi entering the industry. This massive story now from South Korea. This is LG Energy Solution. Now look at this. So it had an enormous yesterday, not just from the millions of retail investors, but perhaps more importantly, billions of dollars worth of institutional investors who were looking at this. So immediately, it's now become the second largest South Korean company. The largest one, of course, is Samsung, and it raised billion in the IPO for the IPO earlier this month, but investors actually dashed into it thinking that they're going to do that, and it probably will set the benchmark for other IPOs in South Korea which are coming up. Basically, difficult to invest anywhere else in Asia with the similar kind of results that South Korea is actually showing. So let us therefore return to the United States and what was said yesterday. What was actually said yesterday? What do these Fed minutes actually mean? Well, the first interest rate is almost undoubtedly going to be in March, and also asset purchasing will stop in March as well. Did that surprise the markets? It shouldn't have done. What did surprise them was the statement which said that the FOMC expects that reducing the size of the Fed's balance sheet will commence after the process of increasing the target range for the federal funds rate. Words. What they're actually saying is that interest rates will be continued to increase after March. Now, whether that means that they will be doing that for every meeting, people actually don't know that. So what we don't really understand is the plan going forward. But we know that what it has to do, therefore, is to be hawkish about inflation, but at the same time not to strangle the recovery of the economy. Stock futures have fallen as far as today's trading is concerned, as though higher. Listen to this, talking of tech shares from Tesla. Now, Tesla recorded profits again, and also, despite the supply problem, it's expecting 50% growth in 2022. That's the promise. So if it doesn't get that, you can expect those shares. This is what Musk is saying. We battled, everyone did, with supply chain challenges throughout the year. We managed to grow our volumes by nearly 90%. Say. So that's a big promise to actually deliver on. Boeing posting its third annual loss, 737 MAX crisis, with the Dreamliner, which is actually not being delivered as quickly as they would actually like, and the shares down nearly 5%. As far as geopolitical things are concerned, the EU has been, in terms of the ECB, has been warning big lenders to Russia to watch out for action. Companies like in the United States, Citi, France, SocGen, Societe Generale, and in Italy, UniCredit. All these big banks, big exposure to Russia. They may be prevented from dealing with their clients in that country if sanctions actually happen. And also, Russia may well be excluded from the International Swift Payment Service. So if that were to happen, the banks warned, watch out and plan for this, because it is going to happen one way or the other if there are incursions into Ukraine from Russia. UK car production down to 1956 levels in the UK. Completely expected there. I think that basically what we're looking at now is a second-hand car market. Supply chain problems. Manufacturers have not been able to get over them in the same way that Tesla apparently has done in the United States. And finally, we saw oil get to $90 a barrel yesterday. It did come back a bit slightly, but that is what the market's calling a threshold breakthrough. Really continued problems. Could be completely triggered by any kind of incursion into Ukraine by Russia. That is the global view this morning.
All right, Michael, it has started to happen. Oil hitting $90 per barrel was no joke. It's an indication of things to come. And when you juxtapose that with the reaction of Jens Stoltenberg yesterday and Anthony Blinken, you'll know that they've said it's in Russia's hands. I think Russia holds the haste in this conversation. How should the world react to it? What should be the alternatives now? Because at some point, Russia will play its gas game. Are we ready for that? Secondly, let's come back to America. Inflation pressures, stock prices driving down, and everything is happening in America as we speak. The Fed has come out to say rate rises start in March. What will be the effect of that?
Let's do the Fed first of all. Some would say not before. mean, we've talked about this endlessly, haven't we, on this programme? And now, at last, it does look interest rate rise is going to happen in March. I think the crucial question is not so much that, which we kind of thought is going to happen. They probably will have to do that now, given the kind of expectation behind it, and given that other central banks are moving in that direction. I think it's really how we're going, which that wasn't really answered yesterday. As Russia, we don't know what's in that paper. We don't know what's in the document that Blinken says that this was everybody's coming from the same hymn sheet as far as Russia's concerned, but we do not know the detail of what's in that. Maybe it'll come out today. I'd be very surprised if it does, because, I mean, part of diplomacy is people whom you wish to have talks with, rather than publicising what you're going to talk about and then having the talk. So that's where we are at the moment. I do feel as though if Russia is excluded, no matter what the oil price is, that's irrelevant, because all there's an increase in the oil price is doing is pushing people to greener alternatives, because it becomes too expensive, and it's also waking this enormous giant in the United States of shale oil production. So I think $90 a barrel has mixed blessings, quite honestly. So I don't think it's a great deal to do with that. I think the greatest thing for Russia is diplomacy, and making sure that they know that if should there be incursions into Ukraine, then strict action will follow. It'll be financial action, and that's what will really worry them.
Okay, Michael. First, let me start on a lighter note. We're told by the Evening Standard yesterday that the cost of beer is likely to go up by 50 pence in the UK, up to about £7 a pint, and that pub inflation is already up to about 10% in terms of inflation. Is that something you are worried about? But I mean that on a lighter note. Let's talk about the US. Do you think that there has been an overreaction by short-term interest traders, federal fund traders, because there's been a massive sell-off? And then there is anxiety, a lot of anxiety from analysts who are saying, look, we expected that this year there will be maybe interest rate hikes about 3 times. But now the analysts are saying, look, it could even be close to 5. The calculation is 4.4, more than 4 times in 2022. Do you think that people are overreacting to the hawkish position taken by the Federal Reserve? Or, there's likely to be some kind of mitigation somewhere down the line? And then, of course, gold has been affected. The price of gold has immediately gone down. But, is this panic, anxiety, or realism? And then, of course, Facebook, now known as Meta Incorporated, has sold off its cryptocurrency business. Is this a way of protecting itself? And is this a reflection of what you often talk about the volatility of cryptocurrency, and Meta Incorporated, trying to cut its losses and protect itself, particularly as there have been issues about data privacy and all of that with regard to Facebook, as it then was, going into the cryptocurrency business?
All right. How many points would you like me to cover? So let's see if I can get to all of them very, very quickly.
Yeah.
First of all, do what you like with those. As soon as they start to get mainstream, and I think as soon as governments start to issue their own cryptocurrencies, I think is a good idea. But that doesn't move away from a state-backed currency. This money is going to be spent. I think that's probably quite a good idea. As far as the Fed is concerned, I agree more with you. I think it's absolutely extraordinary that this kind of nervousness has risen about this, because everybody knew this was going to happen, and really bets on taking how aggressive the Fed is going to be over the next year. I mean, look at what corporate America is doing. Look at what that's much more important than worrying about this. I think the markets have got themselves into a febrile state. And remember, this is the really, really important point. People now trading in the market have never, ever been through the kind of market conditions that we're facing at the moment, because it's been buy this and buy that and buy on the dip. That's not happening.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael, for your time. Really appreciate you this morning. For updates on COVID-19 pandemic around the world, Adeswa Moro is here with us. Adeswa, great to have you. Morning.
Thank you so much, Rafai. Great to be here. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning to and good morning, Dr. Abati. Morning. Well, let's look at the latest updates from the COVID-19 pandemic from around the world, starting with the statistics as usual. And the WHO has given a weekly breakdown of the figures so far. From January 17th to the 23rd, COVID-19 cases increased by 5% compared to the week before, with over 21 million cases reported for that week alone. And this representing the highest number of weekly cases recorded since the start of the pandemic. While the number of deaths reported were nearly 50,000, it was similar to the previous week. Now, the WHO in this weekly report says all its 6 regions of the world saw about an increase. The largest increase was in the Eastern Mediterranean region with 39%, followed by the Southeast Asia region, 36%. Europe saw 13%. The Western Pacific region reported a similar number of cases to the week before. However, there were decreases in African region. Africa saw a 31% decrease for the last 7 days, as well as the Americas. The Americas saw 10% decrease, and that's according to the WHO. Well, on country basis, the United States reported the highest number of new cases, followed by France, India, Italy, and Brazil. The United States as well reported the highest number of new deaths, followed by the Russian Federation, India, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Well, Nigeria's daily infection fell slightly in the last 24 hours. 75 cases and 1 COVID-19 related deaths were reported in 8 states and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja. Meanwhile, an additional 140,866 individuals showed up for their first COVID-19 dose across the country yesterday. And talking about Nigeria, in the last 24 hours, while another 27,229 showed up for their second dose. Remember that Nigeria has also started rolling out booster doses, and over 400,000 people have now received a third dose or a booster dose in Nigeria. The Lagos State government says the passports of 200 inbound passengers who refused to show up before its mobile court after presenting fake PCR tests and COVID vaccination cards have now been forwarded to the Presidential Steering Committee for deactivation for a period of 1 year. The Commissioner for Health, Professor Akin Abayama, made the announcement yesterday. He also announced that there has been a reduction in the cost of the COVID-19 PCR tests at its accredited laboratories from 50,400 naira to 45,250 naira. And this will commence on the 28th of January. The commissioner stated that this reduction was reviewed by the Lagos State Incident Commander and Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu himself. Elsewhere, China has expressed serious concerns and dissatisfaction with the U.S. over reports of an internal State Department request, listen to this, to allow the departure of diplomats and their families from China amid tightening of COVID-19 pandemic measures. Well, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Linjian said China's antivirus regulations were in line with international treaties governing the treatment of the diplomatic personnel, and that the nation was undoubtedly the safest country in the world at the moment. Well, that's according to China. Media reports had actually suggested that the U.S. Department of State was weighing whether to authorize the departures due to the government's inability to prevent Chinese authority from subjecting them to what they refer to as intrusive pandemic COVID measures. We know that China has been pursuing a zero COVID-19 strategy to keep numbers down. However, we're seeing those numbers go up. And finally, this morning, a coronavirus hit Australian warship has docked in Tonga, delivering desperately needed aid to the volcanic and tsunami hit island nation. And this will be done under strict no contact protocols or contactless measures. Tonga is effectively COVID-free with just one infection reported last October. I remember we talked about this story when a plane came in from New Zealand and one person out of over 200 people who came in was infected with the virus. And of course, hopefully they'll get the AIDS without getting the virus. Back to you guys.
All right, a lot to be talked about at this point in time as regards, what is happening with COVID and the likes. But just one thing I'd like to say is, I think the Nigerian authorities should develop better ways to be able to tackle people, that are not appearing in mobile court and are evading mobile court. And we should strengthen that protocol. Because you see, once they bolt out like that, it is hard to bring them back. It is hard to get them to come account. What if those people had COVID? And the numbers keep increasing by the day. So how can we think of better measures to stem the tide before it happens in the first place? Because it goes through that long cycle. You submit to the Presidential Steering Committee. What will they probably do? They'll publish in the newspaper the passport numbers. The ones they published the last time, what effect did it make? Zilch. Nothing. Zero. So we should put better measures in place as regards the fight against COVID-19 and probably bring back that mandate for people to wear masks. Because Omicron, yes, you might say it's fast going, but at this point in time, there are more mutant variants. We're nowhere on our way well out of this, probably in the next 1 or 2 years, or we'll have to live with this for the rest of our lives, but we need to do the needful ourselves to stop the spread. So this medicine after death we always do in Nigeria. Oh, people didn't attend the mobile court. You can penalize them, now you're passing it over. These are the loopholes people see in our system.
Okay, very quickly. Let me start with a briefing by the Lagos State government. Two major highlights for me. The first is the declaration that the fourth wave is tapering off. And then the second will seem to be the declaration that PCR tests in Lagos State have now been reduced from 50,400 to 42,500. Now, the Commissioner for Health disclosed that initially, there was arbitrary, rates. There were arbitrary rates being charged by private medical center operators, and the government had to standardize it by fixing it at 54,500. Now, the question to ask is, what is the formula now that has been used to reduce it to 45,250 in, private medical units? Because if you look at it, to the average Nigerian, 45,250 will still be, strictly on the high side. Because many people complain, either in Nigeria or even in the UK, about the cost of the PCR test, And now that in itself could be a disincentive for, following the guidelines and obeying the protocols that government has put in place. So that question was not addressed by the Commissioner for Health, Lagos State. Nigeria has one of the higher, PCR test rates in the private facilities, because as you pointed out, in the public facilities, it is free, But if you go to a private place, then of course, and there are designated private places where you can take the private the test. But many Nigerians, because of the high cost, assume that government is far more interested in collecting money through COVID testing, rather than, the actual interest in the pandemic itself. And that's why you find many people, they just pay the money and, they don't even take the test, which leads me to the second point about fake PCR tests. Now, the Lagos State government were told has approached the Presidential Steering Committee with the passport numbers of persons who have refused to show up even when they were dragged to the mobile courts that the Lagos State government had put in place. Now, and the recommendation to the Presidential Steering Committee is that the international passports of such persons, should be suspended for a whole year. Now, does the Presidential Steering Committee, does he have such powers? Because I don't think that's part of his mandate. So there could be issues in terms of the powers of the PSC, and there could be people, going to court to challenge both the authority of the PSC and the decision to take away their tickets, because their passports, because you have to establish first and foremost that indeed the tests that they submitted were fake. But beyond targeting travelers who may have come up with fake PCR tests, I think the question that should be asked is that, okay, if indeed it is true that there are fake PCR tests, how did they get those fake PCR tests? Are they from public hospitals? Are they from private hospitals? What level of collusion is involved, beyond all the basic points? As for China and the US, of course, that should not be surprising. Ahead of the Winter Olympics, the US has been having a diplomatic, fight with China. And China is saying it's the safest country in the world when it comes to COVID as a result of its zero COVID policy. Well, all that is just diplomatic talk. China is certainly not the safest country in the world with regard to COVID-19. But the US, of course, will continue to play politics with China because of the rivalry between them, whether it's in trade or international relations or the Winter Olympics.
Well, for me, I don't think that there's anything such as hysteria when it comes to children. I think everybody knows that about me. There's no reaction that is an overreaction. And there was video footage of a 4-year-old child being separated from his parents because the child had tested positive for COVID. Nobody wants that. And if you don't have to be in China and be subjected to forced removal of your child, even at that age, then I'm sorry, you should leave if you want to. And in spite of China's best efforts, look at the Beijing Olympics, which is starting on the 4th of February, for example, that really tight anti-COVID bubble. They even have really strict regulations about collecting the rubbish and what have you. There's still people who have tested positive for COVID. So there's no guarantee that COVID will not infiltrate diplomatic circles, is there? And they could come and get your child. We also saw that awful footage of a dog being bludgeoned to death in China. So they're really quite extreme measures, and people do have the right to protect themselves and their families. If you can't get out of Dodge, I don't blame anybody who wants to. And as for Tonga, it's really awful what has happened. And the idea that one disaster could compound another one with that Australian ship. And this is the thing about COVID and how insidious it really is. I'm sure I want to believe that there were tests carried out before that crew left for Tonga to help out. But sometimes a COVID test, you can be negative on a particular day, and then the next day, the test
incubation period.
Yes, it's unfortunate that has happened. And the last thing Tonga needs now is some kind of COVID outbreak. But I think we've run out of time, yes?
All right.
Thank you, Adeswa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.